So, hello and welcome to broadcast number 2. And first, for those who are not aware of what I do or who I am, because although there is a small amount of people on the broadcast now, this of course can be watched afterwards. And so I'm an author, writer, teacher and consultant. And I've been writing now for nearly 10 years. It will be 10 years at the end of this year. And I've written 22 books and over 2,500 articles. And today I've got a number of things I want to cover. And I want to talk about making a difference, because in the beginning, I think it was at the beginning of the week, I had peace and purpose as the title for this broadcast. And I said underneath that it would probably change. And so I've got making a difference. I'm going to talk about the fear of abandonment and maybe a few other things. Because last time, like now, as you can see, I've got it's a new book cover for my latest book. I'll just show you here now. This is a new cover. So slightly different to the other one. And I knew it had to be done right, and I'm pleased with this cover. So I can see at the moment there are people on the other side. So it'd be good to hear about where you're from and if you were here last Sunday, for the live broadcast. So to start off with making a difference, because of course now there's could be said there's more problems, obviously, with the COVID and the effect that's had on not only people's mental health, but on people's livelihood as well. People not being able to make as much money or any money. And of course, in certain countries, there's the furlough and certain schemes. But I heard today that the people in Bali have been really struggling because there's no, or perhaps very little tourists going there. So they've really been struggling to survive. And with so many problems in the world, it can be natural for someone to want to make a difference in their local area or even bigger, to have an effect on the whole planet. So the first point I've got here for making a difference is clarity. So the first thing, of course, is for someone to be clear about what they want to do, what kind of contribution they want to make at this time in history. And with the internet now, of course, like I'm doing here, can be very easy to have an effect. Someone doesn't need lots of money or to be famous. They just need an internet connection and the desire to make a difference. So, of course, there can be the usual things of blogging and making videos. And there can be collecting money for certain causes. I know that Facebook, for example, allows someone to collect money for a certain charity when it's their birthday. So there's many ways for someone now to make a difference in the world. So the first step has got to be clarity, for someone to become fairly clear about what it is they want to do what it is they want to offer. And of course, another part of this is the why, because as they say, forget the how. Sometimes we don't even know how we're going to have to do something. But as long as there's a why, as long as the motivation is there, and this can be a time when we connect to our own values and become very clear about why we want to do something. And once there is the clarity and the reason why you want to do something, the next step is, of course, to protect your mind. Because there is so much negativity from the media, and even on social media, there can be lots of drama and negativity there. So it can be very easy to get bogged down and to be consumed by all the problems of the world. And of course, while we want to become aware of what's going on, we don't want to be overwhelmed, to feel helpless and hopeless, because then, of course, we're not going to do anything. It's a bit like then trying to lift a very heavy weight. It's too much. What's the point? But if it's a bit lighter, okay, this is a challenge, but I can do this. And in today's age, because we are exposed to so much negativity, more than ever before, we are not equipped to deal with so much. It's far too much for us to handle. And the third point I've got here is to be discerning. So it can be natural for us to want to tell other people about what we plan to do and what we are doing. And if they can't support us, they can end up undermining us. Because based on how they see things, they could tell us, what's the point? Why bother doing that? Well, then you focus on this. Why don't you do something else? Or they might even go one step further and say that you're not capable of doing that. And this will be a projection of their own limits, their own issues. So it's important to not get caught up in other people's limits. And again, this comes back to being careful who we share our dreams with, our plans. And number 4, and this taps into what I said at the beginning about the why, because there's going to be tough times when it seems as though nothing is happening, and perhaps the reality doesn't match up with how we want things to be. So then there's a mismatch, and this can lead to frustration and feeling maybe even powerless, maybe a bit defeated, and this can then take us down, wipe us out. It can be like trying to climb up a mountain or a hill and then sliding back down to the bottom. And during these times, it's then important to tap into our values, to connect to why we are doing something, because that will allow us to keep going when the tough times set in. And point 5, which is slightly different. slightly different angle I'm coming at here, and this is to do the inner work. And of course, doing the inner work can allow us to become clearer about what matters and to work through what comes up so we can keep going. But it can also be a way for us to change the world. And this is because what we believe needs to change externally can be a reflection of us. So through changing ourselves, we can change the world. And of course, if someone is strongly attached to their mind and they can then see themselves as being separate from everyone and everything, then changing themselves can seem to be a waste of time. I mean, how, if that is the case, if we are separate human beings and we are just observers of our reality, then how the hell can changing our inner world lead to an external change? And as they say, perception is reality. So a lot of what we see out there is actually coming from us. And so while it can be easy to try and change the world and change others, what can have an even deeper effect is to go within and to see what is it that I, me, the individual, is projecting onto the external world. What is it that I believe is out there is actually within me? And again, the normal approach is to try to clean a window when it's actually someone's sunglasses or their glasses that are dirty. So instead of changing themselves, so instead of cleaning their own glasses, they can try to clean the window. And as the dirt is actually on their glasses, not the window, it's not really going to lead to transformation. And this is because if someone's own consciousness is in a certain place, they can change what's going on out there, try to change what's going on out there. But what is going on within them will still be there. And a good example of this is someone that tries to change, save, or rescue others. And when someone, and then this can be a career, kind of call it a career path. Someone can be a career rescuer. So this can be something they have done for years. And there can be a few people they're continually trying to rescue and save, or there can be quite a high turnover. It can change for a little while, a few months or a number of years. They're trying to save one person, and then now they're trying to save someone else. And of course, this can be what takes place when it comes to their relationship. So they're always with someone who is struggling in some way, then they're going to try and save them. And even though they're trying to save them, seems like they are, as soon as that person gets better or makes progress, they can lose interest. So they're no longer going to interest them. And then they can find someone else. someone else to try and fix. And of course, playing this role, because there's a role, can allow them to have a sense of superiority, so they're better than these people, they're more capable, they're stronger, but often they come across as invulnerable, and their need to save someone else can be a way for them to save themselves. But the part they're trying to save can be outside of their awareness, so the whole process will be unconscious. They're not aware of what they're doing. So it then seems as though they're trying to save someone else, but they're really trying to save the part of themselves that they've projected onto this person. Because if they actually wanted to assist someone, they would encourage them to stand on their own 2 feet. All the time they're trying to save them or rescue them, they're actually helping to keep them stuck, because they're making them dependent on them and preventing them from moving forward. And of course, coming back to what I was saying before, when someone is projecting their own issues onto the world, they can often do more harm than good. And something that goes into this is something called Ho'oponopono, and it's a Hawaiian, a mouthful there, a Hawaiian healing modality. I don't know a great deal about it, but this was something I heard about in 2009. And I recently heard a story that goes into this, and the story I heard in 2009 in relation to this healing prayer or technique was that someone worked on themselves. So instead of trying to save the world, they worked on themselves. They resolved what came up for them. Because as I read in a book on kahuna healing, it says that in order for us to experience something externally, we need to believe it. If we don't believe something, we won't be able to experience it. Which again comes down to the fact that we are not observers of our reality. We are co-creators of it. Of course, most of what we experience is unconscious, so it can seem as though that just happened. Because, of course, who's going to want to attract dysfunctional relationships or things like that, or an illness? Who's going to consciously? No one's going to consciously create that. But of course, there's so much of our baggage. Obviously, there can be things we are aware of, but if so much of our trauma, our feelings are unconscious, they're pushed out of our awareness and locked in our body, then of course this stuff has to come to our attention. And it usually comes to our attention through what we experience externally. But unless we have the awareness of what's going on, then it's easy to feel like a victim and to blame other people. This person did that, this person did this. But if we step back, we can start to see patterns. So this continually happens, that continually happens, I continually meet this kind of person. They might have a different face, but the same kind of people will continue to show up once we step back and see the patterns. So coming back to the story, there was someone who worked on their own baggage, and through working through what came up, through cleansing themselves, the external their environment changed. And I heard another story the other day about someone who, I think he was like a psychiatrist or something like that, and he worked in this hospital where there was lots of people who were unwell. And for around the year period, this guy didn't try to change anyone else. He worked on himself. So he asked himself, what is this reminding me of? Because as I say, sometimes in order to get our attention, what is going on externally comes out or is experienced externally in a very magnified way. And this way it can gain our attention. And the prayer for the Ho'oponopono is, and I think there's a number of ways that this is said, but one version is, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And that can be used as like a mantra to allow someone to cleanse themselves and to change their environment, and through changing themselves, they will be changing the planet, the consciousness of the planet. As I say, it's often one person that makes a difference. I think it was Margaret Mead or someone who said that. So with that section over, I hope that's given you a few ideas about what you can do if you want to make a difference, and obviously if you want to go a bit deeper and to work on yourself, as well as changing the world. That can be harder, of course, and focusing on what's going on out there can be a lot more exhilarating, and going within can be quite painful, so that's not always a preferred option, especially in our culture where we are basically trained from day one to see ourselves as just observers and separate from everything. And it's like, that's got nothing to do with me, that's out there, it's not me. And of course, through having this approach, it can then give our power away, and we look to people in the public eye, presidents or whoever, to change the world instead of playing our own part. And again, as I said, a lot of what turns up in our reality is not conscious, it's an unconscious manifestation. So this is not a time for self-blame, it's a time for compassion and to be loving to ourselves. Because the person who is hard on us the most is usually ourselves. It's not someone else. We are usually the ones who punish ourselves the most. So, and the next part of this is I want to talk about my latest how-to guide, which is the fear of abandonment, how to heal your fear of abandonment. And after I put my first book together on this subject, I thought that was it. I didn't think I would write anything else, although the first book was mainly about the symptoms. I thought that was it. That area was done. And since I started writing about how someone can resolve certain challenges in these how-to guides, this was a topic that came to mind. So this book, I start off, it does go into the symptoms. So I do talk about the symptoms and what can be experienced when someone has a fear of abandonment. And when it comes down to the fear of abandonment, this can be seen as not just a fear, because of course then, it can be, especially as an adult, can just be seen as irrational. So how can, someone's an adult, who cares if someone leaves them, they'll be fine, of course. But it's not just a fear, it's also the experience itself. So when someone does have a fear of being abandoned, they're also likely to carry the experience of being abandoned. So the many traumas of being abandoned many, many, many times as a child, and the experience will be carried in their mind and body. So when it comes to their fear of being abandoned, they can then cling to others to avoid or to keep the pain within them at bay. Because if it comes up, then they will go back to feeling like they did as a child. And that will be overwhelming with all this pain. So it can be a very strong fear and a hell of a lot of pain carried in their body. And this goes into the next part of the how-to guide, is that it's not all about the mind. Because if it was just an irrational fear, like CBT often makes out, then it's a rational fear. It's there for no reason, just need to, someone just needs to change their thoughts, change their behavior, and this irrational fear will disappear. So this approach is similar to just cutting off the weeds at the top. It's as though the weed has just appeared out of nowhere, so there's no root, so you just need to cut it off and everything will be fine then, because it's just a weed. Just cut it off. And that's CBT, and of course CBT can be seen as a manifestation of the planet, the collective consciousness of the planet in many ways when it comes to the mainstream, because in the Western world there's often about avoidance and not going very deep. So just changing what's going on up top is then normal, because the ego wants to avoid pain and to seek pleasure, so it doesn't want to go there. So if something can then be seen as just all in the mind, then there's no need to go deep diving, as they say, and to face any deep pain, deep trauma. It can just clean the top. So I go into it not being just about the mind, because from my experience and the people I've worked with and the people I've spoken to, they've been in this position where they basically came to believe and were told it was all about the mind, and this set them down the garden path, so to speak, and caused them to waste a lot of time. But as they say, we're always in the right place at the right time, and we need to trust. So although it can seem as though someone was wasting time, it was probably what they needed to go through, and it did in time allow them to find what they needed to find. Because another part of this is that it's not possible, just like someone can't, if they haven't run at all, they can't just go and run 20 miles or 10 miles. They need to just run maybe a mile, maybe a few hundred meters. They got to build their strength. And so sometimes just playing around with as they say, rearranging the furniture on the Titanic, the CBT approach, is what they can handle, and that's okay. That's where they're at. And the next step, or the next part of the how-to guide, I go into the causes. And there, of course, can be the neglectful parents who are not around, but there can also be the neglect that is experienced through having an unavailable caregiver, so they're there, but they're not really there. Perhaps because of their own trauma, they've checked out, so they've left the building. So they're there, but their presence is not there. And a child, when we're very young, we are super aware, super in tune. And then, of course, as time goes by, living in a dysfunctional society, we usually become more shut down. And so in the beginning, a child can sense, it knows, but through not being developed cognitively and through being egocentric, it takes what is going on personally. So then the child then believes it must be me, it's my fault. And this is partly through being egocentric, but it's also partly through needing to experience a sense of control. If the child believes it's them, then it gives them the illusion of control, so they can do something about it. Because facing up to the fact that their caregivers are basically not up to the task, that's too much for them to handle. So creating a story, a fantasy, is obviously a defense mechanism, but it allows them to handle a very difficult period when they are basically ill-equipped to handle what's going on. And the next part, I talk about the importance of external support. So, of course, this is a how-to guide, but sometimes when we are in a very bad way, we do need external support, at least in the beginning and over certain periods after. Because if someone doesn't have a strong presence and if they're in a lot of pain, then they probably haven't developed the presence they need to work on themselves. So through having external support in the beginning, they can start to develop, to strengthen their own system. And through working with someone else, they will have the external structure that they lack. So in the same way that a building that's almost falling down needs a scaffolding, the external support of a therapist or a healer will provide them with the scaffolding, so to speak, that they need to go where they wouldn't go by themselves. And this is just part of life. It doesn't mean they're weak or incapable, although there's something wrong with them. Well, there certainly isn't it. Of course, they've got challenges, but there's nothing inherently wrong with them. So, if anything, it takes courage to reach out. As there's nothing good about keeping everything to ourselves. And after this, I talk about energy, the importance of energy, of course. Whether it relates to exercise or doing anything, we need energy. And when it comes to working through our own wounds, we also need energy, of course. So I go into what can be done for someone to increase their energy so they can really go for this. And of course, as they work through their wounds, they will have more energy, because keeping our trauma at bay takes a hell of a lot of energy to keep it down. And that can be very tiring. And the next part I go into is there's a number of different techniques in there, how to heal trauma. And again, these are techniques that someone can learn from others or find out about on the internet, and they can do that for free, or pay a small amount to learn it professionally from a pro. So because one of the intentions for all these how-to guides was to provide a how-to guide that someone can use, and with techniques and the steps without them needing to have lots of money, because I know that very often the people that are in a bad way don't have lots of money. They can be in a very bad way that they can't even hold the job down. So there's no point to me for a how-to guide to be full of techniques that someone needs to spend hundreds or thousands of pounds to learn, because it's just not going to be possible for them to take the next step. So the next step I've got in here is meditation. And of course, if someone is in a bad way, although meditation is often seen as this panacea in today's world, and everyone do mindfulness and someone can resolve every inner problem under the sun. But some people, if they're in a bad way, they don't necessarily want to meditate because they can just be with their stuff. And this can be overwhelming. They can end up dissociating and can cause them even more problems. So I mention that, but I do mention that with a proviso in the beginning of, if someone is in a bad way, do not meditate in the beginning. Perhaps do it after. But of course, it's all about someone listening to themselves and knowing when to do something. Because we've all got that inner voice, and I don't mean inner critic, but we've all got that part of us that knows whether something is right or wrong. And it can take time for us to develop that part of us, to really trust that part of us, because if someone grew up in a dysfunctional environment, they may have been told what to do all the time, and they can doubt their own inner voice. So it can take time to reconnect to that voice and to trust ourselves. It can be a lifelong process. So after that, I talk about a new connection, and that is about developing a new connection with ourselves and to the world. And in the next part, I talk about the importance of human connection, because we are interdependent. Human beings, we're not independent. In our very masculinized society, it's often about being independent and being the center and being our own island and doing everything by ourselves. And there can be a certain pride with doing everything by ourselves. And this can be a reflection of the fact that there is a lot of shame around our own needs and having needs. And again, this comes back to usually early childhood experiences where our needs were seen as bad. And it can be normal then for someone to either become ashamed of their needs, what they call the shame identification. So they hide them and they try to rescuing. As I said at the beginning, they can try and rescue others and come across as needless, and then they can be seen as an example, even though they're simply selfish, because they're not really needless. They're doing what they do to try and get their needs met indirectly because they feel so ashamed of their needs. Or there can be the pride-based identification where someone can so they don't need anything, and they can try to do everything by themselves. And of course, we need others. So having good people around us. And in the beginning, if someone has got a lot of unhealthy relationships, they may find they haven't really got anyone who can be there for them, who they can open up to. So support groups or the assistance of a therapist or a healer can be a way for them to find this support. And after this, or actually before this, I've missed a step. I'll talk about inner child work. And we've all got an inner child, or we've got many inner children inside us. And although we're an adult, the inner child or emotional self can be stunted. So this part of us can be stuck at different points during our early years. And these children, or these split off parts, will be calling out for our attention. So they will need to be acknowledged, and they will need to speak out, to say what they couldn't say all those years ago. And this is where inner child work comes in. So this is a time where someone is not trying to change anything or fix anything. And again, when it comes to CBT or hypnotherapy or NLP, it's often about changing and fixing things. And when it comes to inner child work, and this is why having the presence is so important, it's not about changing or fixing anything. It's about being there and allowing this part of us to speak up, to be heard. Because this part, all these parts, were not given the attention that they needed all those years ago. So they had to go into hiding. And as these parts are integrated, then it is possible for us to become more integrated, to become stronger and more whole. And the next part, I talk about getting in touch with our inherent worth. So as I said in the beginning, what usually happens, or what happens with if someone has a fear of abandonment, is that they will have taken what happened personally. And so not only can they fear being abandoned, or should I say, they fear being abandoned, obviously because this is what happened in the past, so they've got that trauma there, but they can also believe because they will be abandoned because they're worthless. So part of this trauma can be the need for someone to hide themselves, to play a role. Because they can believe that if someone was to find out how bad they are, not that they are bad, but they will believe they're bad, they would leave them. They would end up being ostracized, and no one would want to be their friend or their partner. Everyone would leave them. So a big part of the fear of abandonment is that someone will feel worthless. And so I go into what someone can do to get in touch with their inherent worth. And a big part of this is the dealing with core shame, toxic shame, as the late and the great John Bradshaw says. I think it was him or perhaps someone else, but it was definitely John Bradshaw who introduced me to the toxic shame term. And of course, he is sadly passed on now, but certainly left an incredible legacy. And I think I remember reading about John Bradshaw, and they were saying that the Chiron or the Chiron sign in astrology, he had one of the Chiron signs And this is to do with our wounds. He had quite a strong Chiron sign in his chart, meaning that he had a lot of shit to deal with, which is why he wrote all those books and all the rest of it. Anyway, and the next part I've got is what to do for someone to integrate their aggression. Because through being abandoned and not acknowledged or given the attention that they needed, they can end up disconnected from their aggression or their fight instinct. And this part of them will be what gives them the energy, can be seen as coming from their first chakra, the base chakra, so around their hips, and this will give them the energy, the drive to assert themselves, to protect themselves, and to change their life. And so when this part of them is split off, someone can be very passive and they can lack the oomph to get the ball moving. But as they heal their trauma, they will gradually integrate this part of themselves and they will again become more whole and complete. And the last step I've got is for someone to journal. So I talk about the importance of journaling, and someone can write about their progress, what's going on, and through getting out on paper, they can become aware of things that they wouldn't realize if they kept it all in their coconut, all in their head up top. So that's very important. Certainly helped me a lot over the years, and the people I've worked with have found a lot of benefits to journaling. So that is all of the steps in the how-to guide, and I'm very pleased with this book. I've packed it in, all the information, and already I think the book has been out now for around a week, and already I've got good feedback from the book. And so it's always good to hear that other people have already benefiting from it. But of course, this is the result of many, many years of research and growth and working with different people and receiving feedback from people from all over the world. So it's very, very complete. And it's not a big book. I mean, this is a book that you can read in probably about an hour, because I didn't want to just supply lots and lots of information. It was about me supplying something that someone can use to gradually transform their life. So it's all about applying what is in the book. As I say, information plus the application leads to transformation. So it's all about the application. So that is that. And so I will share the link to the book on the side, and I will share that under the broadcast as well once this is over, so that will be underneath. And if you'd like to find out more about the services that I offer, the consultations, the inner child sessions, the book writing guidance, where I assist people on how to put a book together, so working on their mindset. So I'm not going to be telling people what to write, but how they can get their mind in the right place so they can take that step. Because as they say, there's a book in everyone, and more than one book in some people. And I also offer 15-minute free consultations to see if we will be a good match to work together. So plenty of different services there. So if you're interested in that, please go to oliverjrcooper.co.uk to find out more. And that is it from me today. So I hope you've enjoyed another live broadcast, and if there's anything you'd like to share with me, please get in touch, and it'll be good to hear from you and to hear your feedback. So I'm now signing off, and thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.